There is a sacred truth you must understand about silence. Silence is not empty. Silence is loud. Silence speaks of fear, of overwhelm, of emotions that feel too big to touch. And when someone withdraws, it is rarely because they don't care, it is often because they care more than they know how to handle. An avoidant does not move toward pressure. They move toward safety. And safety is not something you demand, it is something you become. You see, the mistake many people make is believing that explanation, reassurance, or emotional pursuit will unlock a closed heart. But a heart that learned to survive by shutting down does not open because it is chased. It opens when it senses peace instead of expectation. Here is the divine principle at work. What you pursue runs, but what you embody attracts. When you stop proving your worth, when you stop waiting by the door of their attention, when you stop shrinking your needs to keep someone comfortable, something shifts, not in them first, but in fact, you. And that shift changes everything. An avoidant begins to feel the absence not when you disappear physically, but when you disappear emotionally from the cycle. When your energy no longer says, "Please choose me," but instead declares, "I am whole whether you come or not." This is where silence becomes unbearable for them, because now they are left alone with what they've been avoiding, their feelings. Your calm exposes their chaos. Your groundedness confronts their fear. Your self-respect highlights what they risk losing. This is not manipulation. This is alignment. You are no longer trying to be understood. You are understanding yourself. You are no longer negotiating your value. You are honoring it. And in that space, something holy happens. Their nervous system begins to relax. Curiosity replaces fear, and the walls they built for protection start to feel like prisons. Avoidance breaks silence when silence no longer protects them from loss. And loss is felt most deeply when the other person is no longer emotionally available for confusion, mixed signals, or half connection. Let me say this gently but clearly. You are not meant to abandon yourself to keep someone close. Love that requires self-erasure is not love, it is survival. When you choose peace over obsession, when you choose faith over force, when you trust that what is meant for you does not require you to beg, you create an energetic invitation that feels safe, not threatening. That is when they reach out, not because you chased, but because you stopped explaining, stopped waiting, stopped making their silence louder than your own inner voice. And whether they return or not, here is the miracle. You win either way, because the goal was never to make someone speak. The goal was to become someone who no longer needs silence to define their worth. Stand still. Be rooted. Let peace speak for you. What is aligned will approach you naturally. What is fearful will either heal or fade, and both outkick. Fact. Ohms are blessings. Silence is one of the most misunderstood experiences in human connection. Most people interpret it as rejection, disinterest, or emotional abandonment. But in truth, silence, especially from an avoidant, is rarely about not caring. It is far more often about self-protection. It is the nervous system stepping in and saying, "This feels like too much. I don't know how to stay present and safe at the same time." An avoidant learned early, often unconsciously, that closeness equals danger. Not because love itself is harmful, but because intimacy once came with overwhelm, criticism, inconsistency, or emotional responsibility they were not equipped to handle. So silence became a strategy. Withdrawal became control. Distance became relief. Not relief from you, but relief from the internal chaos that closeness awakens. This is why silence does not mean the bond was insignificant. In many cases, it means the bond touched something deep, something unresolved, something they do not, in fact, ought yet have language or capacity for. When emotions rise beyond what they know how to regulate, they do not lean in, they shut down. Silence is not a message to you, it is a coping mechanism for them. Understanding this changes how you respond. Because when you take silence personally, you unknowingly add pressure to a system that is already overwhelmed. You try to fix, clarify, explain, or reopen communication, believing that reassurance will restore connection. But to an avoidant nervous system, pursuit can feel like intrusion. Emotional intensity, even loving intensity, can register as threat. Silence is how they regain equilibrium. It is how they breathe again. It is how they feel safe. This does not make the silence fair. It does not mean it is healthy, but it does mean it is not about your worth. One of the deepest wounds silence triggers is the fear of being unchosen. It activates old abandonment stories and convinces you that if you were more loving, more patient, more understanding, they would stay. But silence from an avoidant is not caused by a lack of your value, it is caused by a lack of their capacity. They are not rejecting you. They are protecting themselves from feelings they don't know how to process. When you understand this, you stop fighting the silence. And that is powerful, because silence fed by fear grows louder when met with pursuit, but it softens when met with emotional safety. Safety does not mean availability at all costs. Safety means non-reactivity. It means grounded presence. It means you no longer make their withdrawal the center of your emotional world. An avoidant expects two things when they go silent. Either you will chase or you will collapse. Both confirm their belief that closeness is dangerous and destabilizing. But when neither happens, when you remain calm, self-respecting, and emotionally regulated, their internal narrative begins to crack. They start to feel something unfamiliar, space without punishment. This is where, Ling begins, not because you taught them a lesson, but because you removed the threat. Silence is also a mirror. It reveals where you may have been outsourcing your sense of security. It shows you where you were waiting for someone else's presence to validate your worth. And when you use this moment to turn inward instead of outward, you reclaim power that was never meant to live in someone else's response. Avoidants break silence not when they feel chased, but when they feel safe enough to reemerge. Safety is created when emotions are not demanded, timelines are not enforced, and worth is not negotiated. It is created when you stand steady in yourself and allow space without resentment or self-betrayal. This does not mean tolerating indefinite absence. It means you do not abandon yourself while waiting. You continue living, growing, choosing peace. You stop holding the door open with your pain. And paradoxically, this is what makes silence uncomfortable for them. Because now, silence, no longer protects them from loss, it confronts them with it. They feel the difference between someone who is waiting and someone who is whole. They sense the shift when your energy no longer says, please come back, but instead says, I trust myself either way. Silence born of fear cannot survive in the presence of grounded self-worth. It either dissolves into communication or it reveals that the connection cannot meet you where you are growing. And that clarity, painful as it may be, is still a form of freedom. Avoidant behavior is often misunderstood as emotional coldness or lack of desire, but in truth it is a highly sensitive response to perceived threat. The avoidant nervous system is not activated by lack of connection, it is activated by too much of it, too fast, or in ways that feel uncontrollable. This is why emotional safety, not pressure, is the only environment in which reconnection becomes possible. Pressure does not always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks like repeat, check-ins, emotional explanations, logical arguments, or reassurance offered too soon. Sometimes it looks like waiting with expectation, where silence is filled with unspoken demands. To an avoidant, even love can feel heavy when it arrives with urgency. Their system hears, I need something from you, and immediately prepares to retreat. Emotional safety is the absence of demand. It is the sense that connection can exist without obligation, without being responsible for someone else's emotional stability. Avoidance learned early that closeness meant losing autonomy or being engulfed by emotional needs they could not escape. So when they feel someone leaning too hard into the bond, their instinct is not to attach, it is to pull away. This is why pushing for clarity often delays it. The more you seek reassurance, the more they experience interaction as something they must manage rather than something they can enjoy. And when connection becomes management, avoidance becomes survival. Safety begins when the energy shifts from, I need you to respond to, I am okay regardless of the outcome. That shift is subtle, but it is felt. Avoidants are highly attuned to emotional undercurrents. They sense expectation even when words are calm. They feel obligation even when requests are gentle. When pressure is removed, their nervous system finally has room to settle. Only then can curiosity return. Only then can desire resurface. You cannot reason someone into emotional presence when their body believes it is in danger. This is where self-regulation becomes more powerful than communication. When you stay grounded, calm, and emotionally contained, you send a message without words. Connection with me is safe. You are not responsible for fixing or soothing me. That message is deeply disarming to an avoidant. They are accustomed to connection being transactional, love in exchange for availability, presence in exchange for reassurance. When they encounter someone who is emotionally fact, why self-sufficient, the old script no longer applies. There is nothing to run from. Emotional safety is also consistency without intensity. It is warmth without urgency. It is openness without interrogation. Avoidants need time to reorient themselves to intimacy, and time cannot be rushed without breaking trust. When they sense patience that is not passive-aggressive, space that is not punishment, and care that is not conditional, something inside them begins to soften. Pressure says, prove that you care. Safety says, you are free to care at your own pace. And freedom is the doorway through which avoidants return. This does not mean tolerating emotional neglect or abandoning your needs. It means understanding that needs expressed through anxiety often sound like a threat to someone wired for avoidance. The paradox is painful. The more you want closeness, the less you can push for it. When emotional safety is present, avoidants begin to feel what they were avoiding. Feelings rise not because they are forced, but because they are no longer suppressed by fear. Silence becomes uncomfortable not because of guilt, but because connection no longer feels dangerous. They start to wonder. They replay interactions. They notice the absence of pressure and feel the absence of you more clearly. What once felt like relief now feels like loss, and that is when reaching out becomes possible not as a reaction, but as a choice. Safety also allows them to approach without shame. When there is no emotional debt waiting for them, no confrontation queued up, no expectation of explanation, they feel permitted to re-enter. Pressure would require justification. Safety allows presence. This is why the strongest position you can hold is not waiting, convincing, or explaining, but being anchored in your own emotional steadiness. When you stop making their behavior the center of your emotional universe, you create the one condition that allows them to move toward you. Avoidant behavior relaxes in the presence of emotional safety, because safety dissolves the need for defense. And when defense is no longer necessary, silence loses its purpose. What returns is not the avoidant you hoped they would be, but the one they are capable of becoming when fear no longer leads. Inner alignment is not a concept of control, it is a state of coherence between what you feel, what you believe, and how you live. When your inner world is fractured by anxiety, self-doubt, or the need for external validation, that fragmentation is felt in every interaction, especially by someone who is emotionally avoidant. Avoidants are often hyper-aware of emotional incongruence. They may not articulate it, but they sense when someone's peace depends on their response. And that dependence quietly repels. Self-worth is not something you perform for another person. It is something you inhabit. When you are aligned within yourself, your energy changes. You are no longer reaching outward to be chosen, you are standing, inwardly grounded, already whole. This is not emotional withdrawal, it is emotional maturity. And emotional maturity is one of the few things that consistently draws an avoidant back into connection. An avoidant's greatest fear is entanglement, the sense that connection will require them to carry emotional weight they cannot manage. When your self-worth is shaky, even unspoken expectations feel heavy. When your self-worth is stable, your presence feels light. You are not asking them to complete you, reassure you, or regulate you. You are simply inviting them to meet you where you are. This is where inner alignment becomes magnetic. When your actions match your values, when your boundaries are clear but calm, when your emotional state is not swinging in response to someone else's availability, you create a relational environment that feels predictable and safe. Avoidants relax in predictability. Chaos, especially emotional chaos, triggers retreat. Inner alignment also means you stop saying yes to connections that require you to betray yourself. You stop minimizing your needs to keep peace. You stop overgiving in the hope of being valued. And this shift is not confrontational, it is energetic. You are no longer broadcasting need. You are broadcasting integrity. Integrity is deeply attractive to someone who lives in avoidance because it offers a model of groundedness they often lack. Self-worth expressed through alignment says, I know who I am and I trust myself. That message removes the pressure of being responsible for your happiness. It tells the other person that connection with you is a choice, not an obligation. And choice feels safe to someone who fears being trapped. When you are misaligned, when you tolerate behavior that hurts you, wait in uncertainty that erodes you, or stay silent about your truth to avoid conflict, you create inner tension. That tension leaks outward. It turns into resentment, anxiety, or passive pressure. Avoidants feel this even when you think you are hiding it. And they retreat not because they don't care, but because the emotional atmosphere feels unstable. Alignment stabilizes the field. You begin to respond instead of react. You speak when it matters and you rest when it doesn't. You no longer chase clarity from someone who is unavailable to give it. Instead, you create clarity within yourself by choosing actions that honor your emotional health. This is where divine order quietly operates. What is aligned does not beg. It allows, it trusts. It knows that what is meant to meet you will do so without you collapsing your center. As you come back into alignment, something subtle but profound happens. The dynamic reverses. You are no longer orienting your emotional compass around their behavior. They begin to orient around yours. Not because you manipulate, but because grounded energy becomes a reference point. Avoidants are drawn to what feels anchored. When your life is full, your purpose clear, your boundaries gentle. Fact, but firm, you no longer represent emotional volatility. You represent stability. And stability is what allows an avoidant to risk presence. Inner alignment also frees you from outcome fixation. You are no longer performing detachment as a tactic, you are genuinely at peace with whatever unfolds. That authenticity is felt, and authenticity disarms defense. When you stop trying to get them to reach out, you stop emitting the subtle tension of waiting. That tension is replaced by self-respect, and self-respect changes how silence is experienced on both sides. They feel the loss not because you withdrew love, but because you withdrew dependence. You did not disappear, you became solid, and solidity invites contact. Self-worth rooted in alignment does not guarantee someone's return. But it guarantees something far more important. You no longer abandon yourself in the process. And paradoxically, it is this very self-return that makes reconnection possible. Not because you tried harder, but because you finally stood where you belong. Detachment is often misunderstood as emotional coldness, withdrawal, or a lack of care. In truth, healthy detachment is none of those things. It is not the absence of love, it is the presence of trust. Trust in yourself, trust in timing, and trust in the unfolding of what is meant to meet you without force. Detachment does not mean you stop feeling, it means your feelings no longer control your sense of worth or direction. When you are attached, you are gripping outcomes. You are monitoring responses, measuring silence, interpreting delays, and tying your inner stability to someone else's behavior. Attachment says, "This must happen for me to be okay." Detachment gently says, "I will be okay regardless of how this unfolds." And that shift is not resignation, it is emotional maturity. Avoidants feel attachment as pressure, even when it is unspoken. They sense when someone is emotionally leaning on them for certainty or validation. That weight jiggers their deepest fear, being responsible for someone else's emotional well-being. Detachment removes that weight. It allows connection to breathe. This is why detachment is so powerful. It does not demand presence, it permits it. Detachment is an inner posture. You may still care deeply. You may still desire connection. But you are no longer chasing it. You are no longer rearranging your life around the possibility of someone's return. You are living fully anchored in your own rhythm, not pausing your joy in anticipation. This is where divine timing comes into play. Divine timing is not passive waiting, it is active alignment. It is the understanding that forcing what is not ready creates resistance, while allowing what is unfolding creates flow. When you detach, you step out of urgency and into trust. You stop interfering with the natural pace at which emotional readiness develops. Avoidants need time to process feelings internally. Pressure collapses that process. Detachment honor. Fact is it, when you are detached, your energy changes. Conversations feel lighter. Silence feels less charged. You are no longer asking the moment to be something it is not. And because there is no emotional debt attached to interaction, the avoidant feels safer approaching. Detachment also restores dignity. You are no longer bargaining with your value through patience that hurts or understanding that erases you. You are not withholding yourself as a tactic, you are honoring yourself as a principle. That distinction matters. Indifference is numbness. Detachment is clarity. Indifference says, "I don't care." Detachment says, "I care, but I trust myself." This clarity creates emotional steadiness, and emotional steadiness is rare. It is also deeply attractive. Avoidants are drawn to people who are not waiting to be chosen, because those people do not threaten autonomy. Detachment signals autonomy. It says, "I have a life, a purpose, a center." There is no urgency in that energy, no grasping. Noun. Effect. O silent demand. And without demand, fear quiets. Detachment also protects you from spiritual bypassing. It does not excuse behavior or erase boundaries. It simply means you do not chase what does not choose you. You allow space for others to meet you or not with self-abandonment. In that space, something shifts for the avoidant. Silence no longer feels like control, it feels like distance. And distance, when not cushioned by your emotional availability, becomes uncomfortable. They begin to feel the reality of your absence, not as punishment, but as consequence. You did not withdraw to provoke, you withdrew to align. And alignment removes the safety net of your constant presence. This is often the moment when an avoidant reaches out, not because they were manipulated, but because the dynamic changed. They now have room to feel their desire without being overwhelmed by expectation. Divine timing works through readiness, not persuasion. When you detach, you stop interrupting that process. Fact. Sections. You trust that what is meant to return will do so in its own season, and what is not meant to stay will fall away without dragging you with it. Detachment returns your power to you. It centers your life around truth instead of hope alone. And from that place of grounded trust, connection becomes something that meets you rather than something you chase. Whether the silence breaks or not, detachment ensures that you do not. True influence is quiet. It does not announce itself, argue its worth, or demand recognition. It operates beneath words, beneath strategies, beneath effort. When you stop chasing and start embodying peace, clarity, and purpose, you step into a level of influence that cannot be resisted because it is not trying to control. It is simply being. Chasing is loud energetically. Even when you say nothing, the inner urgency is felt. It shows up as waiting, overthinking, replaying conversations, and emotionally hovering near someone's availability. Chasing says, I need. Fact. A response to feel settled. And while that is human, it creates pressure. Pressure activates defense, not connection, especially in avoidant dynamics. Embodiment, on the other hand, is grounded. It is the decision to live your truth, whether or not someone is watching, choosing, or responding. When peace becomes your posture, you are no longer reacting to silence, you are resting within yourself. And rest is powerful. Peace is not the absence of desire, it is the absence of desperation. It allows you to want without needing. When you embody peace, your nervous system is regulated. Your presence feels calm, spacious, and safe. Avoidants respond to nervous system cues more than words. They may ignore texts, but they cannot ignore energy. Clarity is the next layer of influence. Clarity means you know what you want, what you tolerate, and what you will no longer chase. It does not require ultimatums or speeches. It shows up in consistent behavior. You stop sending mixed signals. You stop off. Fact. Oscillating between closeness and withdrawal. You are steady. And steadiness is deeply disarming to someone accustomed to emotional unpredictability. When you are clear, you are no longer available for half connection. Not because you are rigid, but because you are honest. That honesty creates a mirror. It reflects back to the avoidant what they are offering and what they are not. This reflection invites self-awareness without confrontation. Purpose deepens this influence. Purpose is what happens when your life is larger than one relationship. When your days are filled with meaning, growth, and direction, you no longer revolve around someone else's presence. You are moving forward, and movement creates gravity. Avoidants often re-engage not when someone waits, but when someone evolves. Growth introduces a subtle urgency, not emotional urgency, but existential awareness. They begin to sense that time is moving and that your life is unfolding with or without them. Embodied purpose says, I, fact, am becoming. And becoming is magnetic. This is where influence replaces effort. You are no longer trying to get a reaction. You are living in such alignment that reaction arises naturally. Silence begins to feel louder to them, not because you demanded sound, but because your absence of pursuit removed the background noise they relied on. When you embody peace, clarity, and purpose, you stop negotiating your value. You stop explaining why you deserve to be met. You simply live as someone who expects mutuality. That expectation is not verbal, it is energetic. Avoidants often respect what they once avoided when it is no longer asking for permission. This shift also protects you. You are no longer vulnerable to being pulled back into confusion by a single message or moment of attention. You have a center. You evaluate connection from groundedness rather than longing. And that groundedness changes the power dynamic without aggression. True influence does not try to change someone. It creates effect. This is an environment where change becomes possible. By embodying peace, you show what regulation looks like. By embodying clarity, you show what honesty feels like. By embodying purpose, you show what fullness offers. And whether the avoidant steps forward or not, you remain intact. The paradox is this. The moment you stop trying to be influential is the moment you become it, because you are no longer acting from fear of loss, you are acting from truth. That truth cannot be ignored forever. It either draws someone closer in resonance or releases them in misalignment. And both outcomes are forms of alignment. As we close, remember this. Silence is not your enemy, and your worth was never hidden inside someone else's response. When you choose peace over pursuit, alignment over anxiety, and trust over force, you step into a power that needs no explanation. What is meant to meet you will recognize you without being chased, and what cannot will quietly fall away without breaking you. Stay root, ed in who you are becoming, honor divine timing, and let clarity lead your steps forward. Thank you for allowing this message to meet you where you are. May you walk onward with strength, wisdom, and unshakable self-respect. Goodbye, and remain grounded in truth and peace.